The Japanese have a word, kaizen. It's the word for constant, incremental improvement. You know, sometimes as business owners, we have the impression that if we just found out the one secret, the one trick, the one magic move, it would make all the difference in the world. And you know, as a fighter pilot, I actually believed that when I first got into the Marine Corps. You know, I had watched the movie Top Gun, and I saw Maverick, who had a magic move called, if you put the brakes on, they'll fly right by. But over years of teaching and training in the Marine Corps, what I understood after all those years was that success comes with constant, incremental improvement. On today's show, I'm interviewing my friend, legendary speaker, Joel Weldon, and together we're going to talk about the small changes that make big differences in your business. EdTalks Live is next. Hey, what's up, party people? My name's Ed Rush, 5-time #1 best-selling author, your host for the most positive place in the planet for insanely implementable ideas. Now, you didn't think we were going to be able to do it, but those of you who watched with me on Tuesday night, we did. If you just joined us for the first time, on Tuesday night, we had over a 2-hour watch party for the first presidential debate, and I promised you that we were going to keep it positive. And let me tell you, that was not easy, but we did it. And all I was doing was proving to you that if we can be positive in that environment, we can be positive in any environment. And so today we're going to, I don't know why I'm laughing so much at that. By the way, for those of you already a big crowd in chat, jump in on the right-hand side if you're on YouTube. Tell us who you are, where you're from, what you do. If you're on Facebook, jump in below. We've already got some great comments that are coming in chat. But before I do that, I'm just going to bring in, normally I do a little bit more of a preamble, but the person that I'm bringing in today is, if I asked Joel Weldon to start teaching what he knows, it would be about 3 more weeks before we ended the show. He's got such a wealth of knowledge. So what I'm actually going to do is bring Joel in. I'm going to say hello to my friend Joel. I'm going to introduce you in a second, but I want to say hello to Joel just because you are the professor emeritus at EdTalks today. It's good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you, Ed.
Well, it's an honor to have you. So let me do an introduction. And for those of you who've taken Joel's courses, you know, Joel is a master at introductions. In fact, the introduction that I use for my speaking talks to this very day comes from an introduction that Joel wrote for me about 3 years ago. And so I asked Joel to send me an intro because I was like the intro. So I'm going to read part of this, and then I'm going to say hello to all of you in chat, and then Joel, you and I are going to get cranking. So let's get started. So COVID-19 has turned the business world upside down and inside out. You know, meetings were canceled, sales presentations done virtually, and Zoom has become like a verb. So you know that communication with your customers has changed. But the objective is basically still the same. You want to be able to get your message out and connect with people. And the better you communicate, the better you're going to do in all of these brand new and different times. Okay, so this is why I asked Joel to come in with 45 years of experience. Now, Joel was one of the original founders of an organization called the National Speakers Association, all the way back in 1974. By the way, Joel, I was 2 then. He's been inducted into the Professional Speakers Hall of Fame. He's a legend in that world. He's won the Golden Gavel Award for his profound impact on his work in corporate America. Joel's been paid over 3,000 times to speak at events. He's coached over 10,000 speakers and trainers. And I asked Joel, I said, with all that you've done, Joel, how old are you? And he just smiled and said, listen, my social security number is 5. Okay, so that was Joel's answers. Now, Joel's been around a long time, but his unique business card says success comes in cans, not in can-nots. And today, together, Joel and I decided to tackle the topic of the power of doing little things that earn you big results. Joel Weldon, the legend and my friend, welcome to the show, buddy.
Well, thank you, Ed, for that wonderful introduction. And so glad you're here. You made a wise investment of your time today to sit in on Ed's special talk program. So since you said a little thing, let's really title this, Elephants Don't Bite.
I like that. All right. So
as you're listening, let me ask you this question and then type in your answer in the chat box or below. Have you ever been bitten by a gnat, a mosquito, a bee, or one of those? They call them no-see-ums in different parts of the country. Have you ever been bitten by any of those? Just write yes or no.
Chat, tell us if you've ever been bitten by a gnat, a mosquito, fly, or a bug, and you can tell us which one it was too if you want to.
No, just
yes or no.
Yeah, okay. Yes or no. Yes or no.
All right. It's yes or no in chat. And by the way, I'm going to jump into chat and just say hello to some of our friends while you're answering.
Sure.
What's up, Barry? Good to see you. Wendell Bugs as well. Robert, what's up, my man? Dean is my son's name with a birthday, actually, Robert. Thank you for asking that. Hello, Diana. I'm grateful for you as well. Mike Semmel, Joel says he's holding his success comes in cans. Can. By the way, if you know Joel, you know he sends out these cans that says literally success comes in cans. Steely-eyed missile man. Yep, positive place is the mantra. Tuesday was, yeah, it wasn't all that easy, but we had fun. Yeah, negative Nancy's, they were there. All right. Yes, says Robert. Too many times. Delisa Tool says yes. Hello, Delisa Tool. Wendell Bugs says yes, and the answers are still coming in. My system. Robert, too many times. Delisa Tool. Hold on a second. Yes. My system. Hold on. My system. I just pushed play up the wrong button. My system is a little bit slower than YouTube, but let's just say there's a lot of yeses in there, Joel.
All right, good. Now, what's your answer? Yes or no?
Yeah, so I was in Mississippi for 2 years, Joel, in flight school, where they invented the citronella candle. Actually, there's a little town called Citronella, so that was mosquito central. So the answer to that is yes.
All right. Now, the next question for you as you're listening: have you ever been bitten by an elephant?
All right. So
only chat, write yes if you have.
Only right.
Only right yes. Don't write no. Just is anybody ever been bitten by an elephant on Ed's Dog Show here?
I've never been bitten by an elephant, but I've ridden an elephant.
No. I'm talking about
that doesn't count.
All right. So I think we're pretty safe in saying that you haven't. So what's the point of that? It's the little things that get you, not the big. It's those gnats, mosquitoes, and bees. And the same thing happens when you're communicating with your prospects, customers, or clients. When you're speaking or communicating or saying anything, my premise is it's the little things that you do that can get you huge results. And it's the little things that we do wrong that can cause big problems for us. So let me just give you an example of the power of little things. Ed, how many children do you have?
4. I have 15, 13, 11, and 2-year-old.
Okay, let's take the 2-year-old. What's the 2-year-old's name?
Joanne.
Jojo. Okay. Yeah. What if when Jojo was born, you put $1 away in an account for Jojo, and you got 8% interest on that money? Now, that wouldn't be a lot, $1 a day, for especially the income that you earn. But Jojo would have over $1 million before they were 70.
Wow.
By just putting $1 a day away. That's the power of little things adding up. So we're going to talk about some little things that you can do to make a big difference. And Ed, we have kind of our list here of doing those things. And one of the things that would be helpful is when you're introduced. And notice that Ed introduced me, and Ed also had an introduction of him. And whenever you are making a presentation, whether it's a virtual presentation like we're doing today or a live presentation, you should be introduced. Introduced by whoever's the host. In this case, it would be Ed, or it could be one of your assistants in your business. It could be your spouse. It could be one of your children. It could be a client. But keep this in mind. Your introduction is never your bio. Your introduction is never your bio. The introduction sets up your message. And the purpose of an introduction is, and this is a little thing, but so many speakers miss it, is to get your audience already primed. And when the introduction is over, the only thought you want in your audience's mind is, I can hardly wait to hear what you're going to say.
Yeah.
That's the goal. And that's what Ed told you. And I wrote that introduction for him then. So here's the key to an introduction. You want to set up the message. And when you do it right, it's like, I call it speaking downhill. Now, the downhill analogy is referencing a bike. I know you've ridden a bike. So when you go down a hill, it's real easy. When you go up a hill, it requires a lot of effort and strength. And that's unfortunately what most presenters do when they're speaking. They start uphill. They're dragging the audience into the message.
Yeah.
When you get a great introduction, the audience is already with you and you can feel the difference. And that's what happened when Ed used that introduction over 3 years ago. So one of the things you might consider in an introduction is the use of numbers. Notice when Ed introduced me, he said, Joel has been paid to speak at over 3,000 events and has personally coached or critiqued over 10,000 speakers. When you heard those two statistics, you should have said to yourself, well, I guess this guy's got some experience. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to be any good. That doesn't mean I'm going to have a message for you, but it means I've got some credibility.
Yeah.
What about when you're introduced? If you're in real estate and you're talking about listing a property with you, Fred has listed over 1,500 properties here in the greater whatever area you're in. Okay, the use of a number in an introduction. If you're a financial advisor and you're leading people from working into retirement and you put in the introduction, and Mary Lou has personally held the hands of over 1,200 family members who have transitioned from the workplace into retirement. That's a little thing, but that little thing can make a big difference. So how about we just stop each time, and Ed, if you see something in the chat box or you want to add something, you just jump in, and then I'm going to go to that list that we created. Next thing is going to be defining our terms.
So I want to go back to this introduction. And
Yes.
by the way, 100% right. And it was a big shift for me going from a speaker who was basically giving someone my bio, which bios are fundamentally boring because nobody really wants to hear about you anyway. They want to hear about themselves, right? And so when I shifted from writing a biography, essentially we give to somebody, and writing an actual intro, it made a really big difference. One of the things I started adding to my introduction is I would have the introducer say at the end of the introduction, if you ever get a chance to work with Ed, do it. And I have to tell you, that was a guy, a mutual friend of ours whose name is Mike Koenigs. Mike and I were at an event together, and I actually wrote an introduction for Mike that we were using. It was 5 years ago. I started to use that. And what I realized is what you just said is right, which is in a lot of ways, that means your introducer, who typically has a lot better connection to the audience anyway, is now doing some of the heavy lifting that you want to do. By the way, Mike Semmel, Mike's been following you for quite a long time. I like what he wrote here. He said the introduction is like pre-suasion. So not persuasion, but pre-suasion. I like that. That term it was Cialdini's book is actually called Pre-Suasion, and I like that. Also like calling it owning the ground. It's like you coming up to the hill in a battle and you owning the most important piece of real estate. So great comments in chat. Please do continue to put your comments and your questions. And by the way, for those of you who just joined us, and we did have a few folks who just joined us on the show. My name is Ed Rush. I'm here with my friend Joel Weldon. We're talking about the power of doing little things that earn you big results. Joel, I think the second one that you have on the list of things that we're going to talk about is defining your terms in your presentation. What does that mean? Is that a glossary of terms, or what do you mean when you say that?
Well, I think the defining of the terms means exactly what it says. So often, because you're speaking, whatever your subject is you're speaking about, you're an expert in that subject. You know about it. You've lived it. You've experienced it. It's so crystal clear to you, but so often the people that you're talking to don't have a clue. So as an example, I was working with a very successful financial advisor in Boston, and we were going over what happened at a webinar he had done, and he had sent me a copy of the webinar. And about 3/4 through, he said, and now we've come to an intersection in the webinar. And when I heard that word intersection, I thought, well, we're not driving. We're not in a car. There's no stop sign or light. What does that mean? So afterwards, in critiquing his presentation, I said to him, Jonathan, what did you mean when you said the intersection? He said, oh, we're just coming to a point where they need to make a decision. I said, is that the term you use? He said, well, yes, you're at an intersection in the presentation. It's time to make a decision. Now, he graduated from Harvard. He's extremely brilliant. He has a wonderful vocabulary. but that term meant nothing.
Yeah.
So all he had to say is, we come to an intersection, which means it's time for you to make a decision. Oh, okay. And that's what I call the definition of terms.
Yeah.
As an example, if you're talking about retirement, if you asked 100 people what retirement meant, you'd probably get 100 different answers.
Right. Yep.
So if you use this little elephants don't bite tool to define a term, you set up the definition in the beginning. So let's just say we're going to define what Ed's talk show is. This is an interview. On this talk show, we're going to just have a conversation with somebody that I feel is important for you to hear about. And we're going to have a discussion back and forth. It's not going to be like the debate the other night where they were interrupting each other, but I'm going to interrupt Joel and he's going to interrupt me, but we're going to do it to help you. Okay, so we've just defined what's going to happen on Ed Talks. And that's what you need to think of. Are you using some terms that could be industry related or buzzwords or acronyms? How many times do we have acronyms? So my daughter gave a talk recently. She's a professional speaker and one of our coaches, Jenny Lachlan. And we did a little training session the other night. She met somebody who said, you and I know each other. We met at the ED meeting.
Yeah.
And Jenny is thinking, erectile dysfunction. I didn't go to any meeting like that. What is she talking about? And we were on a Zoom call, she said, and the woman said, it looks like you're looking. And Jenny said, what do you mean ED meeting? Oh, the executive decision-making meeting. Oh, okay. Now, that woman knew that executive decision-making meeting was that group. But the person she was talking to didn't have a clue. So there's an example of the power of defining your terms.
I really like this.
So let me define what makes a great speaker. Since we're talking about you being a better speaker and communicator, here is the premise of everything it's taken me over 45 years to learn. If you believe these things, you will automatically become an even better speaker. Belief number one, to accept. This is part of the definition.
Someone put this in chat, by the way. Belief number one. Go ahead. Speaking
effectively is a learned skill.
Good.
I mean, when I was in high school, I couldn't lead my Sunday school class in silent prayer. I couldn't talk. I didn't know how to communicate. I never even spoke in front of a group until I was 28 years old. Yeah, if anybody ever told me I'd have a career as a speaker, I said, that's impossible.
Yeah.
But you can learn to speak. Ed, when you were born, you were not a pilot.
Correct.
You learned in the Marine Corps how to fly an F-18.
Yep.
It's a learned skill, speaking. Sure, you have some more natural ability maybe than somebody else or less ability. Doesn't matter. You can still learn. Second belief to accept, be yourself. I've known Ed for all these years, and every time I'm talking to Ed, before the show, on the show, at a meeting, Ed is Ed. If you're one of his members of his great group that he coaches.
Just to clarify, though, when you say the word Ed, ED, you're talking about me, not any dysfunction, just to be clear.
Okay. Let's when I'm talking about Ed Rush, okay, that good, very good. Thank you for correcting me on that one. We didn't want to think about
defining terms.
We're back to ED again. Okay,
back to ED. My favorite topic.
I didn't even think in that direction. Your mind is going down to that debate from the other night. Okay, all right, but when you think about that, Ed is Ed, and that's what you need to be. Now, if you're dull and boring, that's how you should speak.
Yeah.
You shouldn't try to be a Tony Robbins.
Right.
And especially if you're using speaking to grow your business, that's what you should be thinking of doing. If people see and hear you, and then they come and meet with you privately or want to become part of your group or buy your product or service, and then they see you and they think, well, who are you? You're not the same guy I saw on the video or on that Zoom call or on the meeting or at the meeting. You're so different.
Yeah.
You want to be congruent. So what if you are dull and boring? Then just speak dull and boring, but set it up.
Yeah.
So can I give a story, Ed?
Well, yeah, this is interesting because there are some speakers, frankly, that aren't particularly interesting in the way that they speak, but I've heard people who were maybe self-deprecating in their humor about that, or they joked with the audience about how they weren't that interesting. So it ended up working out really well for them. So give me some examples.
Well, first of all, let me mention two names that some of your listeners might know. And when I'm going to give you the name, I'm going to frame them.
Okay.
I'm going to define them. So the first name is Earl Nightingale.
Yeah.
And Earl Nightingale in 1955 recorded The Strangest
Secret. Yeah.
Which became the largest selling recorded message in history.
Yeah.
Still is today. He became known as the Dean of Personal Motivation. He started the industry of learning by listening.
Yeah.
And I knew the Earl very well the last 3 years of his life. He moved to Scottsdale. I took him fishing. He went up on our houseboat. And I knew him before that as a speaker. And when Earl would speak, Ed, he would get behind a lectern and he would read his talk.
Wow.
With not a lot of energy, not a lot of voice variation. He became the most listened to voice through that message of The Strangest Secret because his message was so powerful. Second name to think of, Jim Rohn, who recently passed on a few years ago. Jim Rohn did the same thing. He had a white loose leaf book. He would walk up on stage in front of hundreds or thousands of people, and he would read his talk. And people today are quoting Jim Rohn, and lives have changed because it's the message. So here's an example. I was speaking at a meeting, and the president said, Joel, this is a wonderful presentation. Could you coach my chief financial officer? He's got to give a talk at the annual meeting every year. He's on tomorrow. Everybody falls asleep. It's the low point of our meeting. You must have some tools to help him make a better presentation. I said, what's his name? He said, Boring Bob. I said, Boring Bob? He said, yeah, that's what everybody calls him at the corporate office. So I met with Bob that evening at just a little side part at their reception. And he was literally the most boring person I'd ever met. And he knew it. And he said, I hate doing these presentations. Everybody falls asleep. I said, then why do you do them? He said, because the CEO says that this information is so important and I'm the only one that can give these numbers. So I do it every year. How do I do it better? I said, don't do anything different. We're just going to introduce you differently. And I'm going to give you an opening. And that's the only thing you should change.
Wow.
He said, well, I can do that. So in the introduction, I wrote for the president who was introducing you the next day, the next part of our meeting is usually the most boring part of the meeting and everybody hates it. But the reason we bring in Bob, and he's our chief financial officer, nicknamed Boring Bob, is he's boring and everybody falls asleep. So why do I bring him in every year? Because he gives the numbers that you as the sales team need to have. And you need to pay attention to him. So we have a new plan today. If the person next to you starts to fall asleep, you have to wake them up. For those of you in the front row, and then he points to the front row, your job is, if Bob starts to fall asleep while he's talking, you run up on stage and wake Bob up. All right, now, please welcome the most boring speaker you ever hear, Boring Bob. And they gave him a standing ovation.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
All right.
Awesome.
Is that speaking downhill?
That's so great.
So Bob had them, and then the opening I wrote for him was to say this. And I think his wife's name was Evelyn. So he said, well, thank you so much for the introduction and for that standing ovation. That was great. But some of you know Evelyn, we've been married 27 years. And on our first date, she slapped me. I wasn't getting fresh. She thought I was dead. Now, I know some of you see my lack of excitement and enthusiasm. That's not how I feel inside. Inside, I am so excited about this company and where we're going and what a wonderful year you had as a sales team. And I know next year is going to be even better. So I put together the numbers, and that's what I'm going to share with you for the next hour.
Yeah.
And by the end of that, and he never changed anything else. He just gave the same boring presentation,
but
got another standing ovation at the end.
It's great.
And now his session is the highlight of that national meeting every year because we just made fun of it. But remember belief number 2 I asked you to accept. Be yourself.
That's great.
If Bob tried to be an Ed Rush with power and energy and force
and humility,
so uncomfortable, so uncredible. There'd be no credibility to that because that's not who he is. So no matter what it is, my problem or challenge to overcome is my age. I'm always the oldest person in the group. So what did Ed say when he introduced me? My social security number is 5.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to add a couple of other lines. I mean, I'm so old. I've got an autographed copy of the Bible. I remember when the Dead Sea was just sick. I mean, I was a busboy at the Last Supper. Okay, now, none of that's true, but you're laughing or chuckling at me making fun of myself. So one thing to think of, if there's something that could distract, bring it up and laugh at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because everybody else sees it like boring Bob. He couldn't get away from the fact that he was boring. I can't get away from the fact I'm 79 years old, but I feel like I'm 40, and it's not an age, it's a number. And that's all you have to think of. So numbers are important in introduction. That was one of the little things. And now defining your terms.
That is such a good story. By the way, the genius behind the boring Bob thing is it's not like it's a secret. Everyone knows it. They know it. The guy knows it. Bob knows it. And so when you take it, it's almost like a complete reframe on the entire talk, but all you did was change the introduction. I thought it was great. By the way, there's some really great comments in chat.
Well, you had, would you say a good percentage of the people watching and listening to us now tuned into the debate on Tuesday night?
I would say most of, we did our own little parties. So yeah, I'd say most people probably watched.
All right. And you kind of made some comments about how disruptive it was and so on. Now that everybody knows what happens, what if we had introduced Donald Trump this way and say, okay, so now we have the president of the United States. Now, if you have been alive for the last 3.5 years and watched how Donald conducts himself, you can be prepared for him to interrupt Joe Biden.
Yeah.
He's going to interrupt Joe. He's going to interrupt me. He even interrupts himself while he's talking. Yeah. And the reason is, and I asked him about this, he said, I am so passionate about our country. I am so committed to making this a better place. I want America to be great again. I can't control my energy and enthusiasm if I feel we're not doing that. So that's the reason I'm keeping interrupting everybody.
That's great. That's
great.
All
right. Now, he's still going to interrupt. But if we had framed it differently, now you can't do that in a debate.
Yeah.
He had agreed to the rules and he changed them. But the point being, if something about you could be a distraction or a disruption, put it in the introduction and make fun of it yourself. And then it goes away. And the message is what's left. And that's the key for you.
There's a line that I use sometimes where I say, look, I'm a Marine. What that means is I don't pronounce words properly and I don't even speak in complete sentences. But, and then, when you stick with me, we're going to get to the destination. It's so interesting how that fun little self-deprecating humor is so disarming, or just that reframe. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And as you're watching, I'm going to jump in the chat because there's great comments. As you're watching, think about how you can do that. Just be honest with your presentation style and see how you can do it. I think this is great. So thank you, Barry. Robert says, this is excellent. And David Zetz from here in San Diego, one of my coaching members, says, Joel, you're killing me. Ever try stand-up comedy? Which you probably have if I know you. So I really like this. I'm human. Boring Bob is at least consistent, congruent, and boring. I really like that. By the way, if you just joined us, my name's Ed Rush. This is Joel Weldon. We're here on EdTalks Live every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 Eastern. Today shows the power of doing little things that can earn you big results. If you haven't already done so, right down here on the bottom right-hand corner is a button that says subscribe. It's so easy to click that. There's a little bell sitting right next to it that lets you know when we have a show. YouTube just sends you a little notification when the shows are live. And we do some shows that are off our normal schedule, like we did this week, that you're going to want to be connected to. So please make sure that you do that. Joel, we are on to not.
Well, wait, one of the chat mentioned about the humor stand-up. Let me explain about humor, because in your presentation, here's why you need to use humor and get your audience. I'm not talking about rolling on the floor hysterically. I'm talking about smiling or chuckling or just recognizing the humor in something. Humor energizes a listener, but more important, it opens their thinking to new ideas. And that's why humor is so important. And one of the tools in our system, this Ultimate Speaking System logo that I've got over here, is when you use humor, first of all, you never say anything is funny. If you make something available in a story or an illustration, tell the point ahead of time. So I'm going to give you an example of a way that you can use humor, even if you're not funny. And that's to read something. Yes, you can read something that somebody else said if it gets the point. Now, let me just set up this example. Just imagine we've talked about gratitude and how important it is to write thank you notes to people and express our gratitude. And Ed, I know you're big on that, expressing gratitude and putting it in a tangible form. And we've talked about writing thank you notes. And then I would end that discussion with this illustration. So imagine how this dad felt when he was walking down the hall past his son's bedroom and he sees something that shocks him. And what shocks him is the bed is made, the floor is cleaned, and there's a note on the bed. And it says, Dad. Well, he rushes over, opens the note, and this is what he read. Now, notice, I'm going to read the note to you, but notice it's on a black card. It's a lot less distracting than having a white piece of paper that's flopping around. This is another elephants don't bite tip. Use a black card and you can read to an audience.
I tell you, just so you know, I took after you, Joel. So Joel, the event that you and I spoke at 3 or 4 years ago, where we connected for the first time, you were the MC. And I had been hired before that to be an MC for the event. And after that, I still have a big stack of black cardstock sitting right there. I started putting my notes on a black card because it just looks a lot more professional than crumpling up notes in front of an audience. So I love it. Keep going.
Okay, so the father sees this note, he opens it up, and this is what he reads. Dear Dad, I've had to elope with my new girlfriend because I wanted to avoid a scene with you and Mom. I've been finding real passion with Brandy. She's so nice, even with all her piercings and tattoos. Dad, Brandy is pregnant, but she said she's so happy about it, even though she's much older than I am. But she already owns her own trailer in the woods and has enough firewood to get us through the winter. She wants to have many more children with me, and that's my goal too, Dad. Brandy taught me that marijuana doesn't hurt anyone. And we're going to be growing our own for ourselves and then trading it with some of her friends for all the cocaine and ecstasy we want. But please, Dad, don't worry. I'm 15 now. I know how to take care of myself. And someday I'm going to come back and visit you and Mom so you can get to know your grandkids. I love you, and I'm going to miss you, Dad. P.S. None of this is true. I'm over at Jason's house. I just wanted to remind you that there are things worse in life than my report card, which is in the desk drawer. Please sign it and tell me when it's safe to come home. All right. Now, what do you do? Now, Ed, you're laughing.
That's framing. That's
all right.
I love that. I love it.
But the purpose of humor is to open Ed's thinking to new ideas. Now, as fun as that was, seriously, who needs to get a note from you?
Yeah.
Is it your dad or your mom or your mentor or a brother or sister? Or is it Ed for the coaching that he's given you? Okay, bam. That's the power of humor. Okay, so on our next idea that you put down in the outline is how to frame people. So what does that mean? Well, let me give you a story. It was October 2019 in San Francisco at the Hyatt Regency at the airport. And the meeting was CEG Roundtable. And one of the speakers mentions, and as an example, Mickey Mantle was a person who did just that. And he said the name Mickey Mantle. The man sitting next to me leans over and says, "Who's Mickey Mantle?"
Oh, wow. Huh.
Now, I looked at him, and he was certainly much younger than me. Everybody's younger than me. I mean, I went to an antique store. They tried to sell me. So he was this young guy, a millennial, and he's asking me, who is Mickey Mantle? Now, the chances are you know who Mickey Mantle is.
Yeah.
But what should the speaker have done? He should have framed that name. So as an example, we're talking about this skill, and I forget exactly what it was, but I remember that question. Mickey Mantle, the great New York Yankee baseball player that had 7 World Series victories under his belt and 3 times the most valuable player.
Yeah.
Considered by most to be one of the top 10 baseball players that has ever lived. Mickey, okay, that's framing it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Don't say Steve Jobs, because somebody might not remember. Steve has been gone for a while. The co-founder of Apple, Steve Jobs.
Yeah, that's good.
When he came back to run the company, said, it just takes a couple of seconds. Now, why do you do that? Because if your audience doesn't know exactly what you're referring to, they're going through their data bank.
Yeah.
They're researching, okay, Mickey Mantle, did he start a startup company, or was he on television? And they're not listening to you.
Yeah.
So that little elephants don't bite tool,
it's really
when
good.
you use a name or a company, frame it. So I'm working with a gal over in Sweden on her presentation. She wrote a book for the founder of DHL. And she kept mentioning DHL, the founder, and this.
Yeah.
I said, I think I know who that isn't. That shipping company similar to FedEx, but from Germany. Yeah. I said, why don't you just say that?
Yeah.
The founder of DHL, similar to FedEx, a worldwide international package distribution company. Yeah. Okay. Nobody is going to be thinking, who's this guy from DHL?
Yeah.
So that's a tool. All right. Anything in the chat box?
Yeah, I'm going to go to chat in a second, but
we give some other little tips.
I'll tell you, Joel, where I first learned that as a speaker. It had to do with industry terms. So, for example, I think this was back in like 2010, 2011. I was on stage and I was just speaking about some marketing strategy. And I said, when you have an autoresponder, and then I gave some advice. And this lady came up to me after the talk, and thank God she did, because most people won't even ask. And she said, I hate to ask this, but what's an autoresponder? Okay. And I thought, man, I wonder how many other people were in the audience that heard me say that, and then they felt inadequate after I said it because they didn't know, and now they're confused, and a confused person can't take action. And so I simply just started in that talk, I started saying, this is the way I would say it. I would say, so the next thing you're going to need is an autoresponder, which, as you know, is nothing more than a series of emails that comes out automatically from inside of your system to communicate with your prospects. And I started using that, which, as you know, because literally 90% of the people did know, so I didn't want to offend them by teaching them something they already knew. But then the other people, if they didn't know, if I said, as you know, then they would appreciate the fact that I assumed that they knew that, So, but yeah, I mean, it's amazing how many of the terms you might use that people don't really know. Some great comments, by the way.
And that was so brilliant, as you already know. And that's one of the phrases you should use if you're defining seemingly a common term.
Yeah.
But you want to put it in the words that are going to represent what you're talking about in your message. Another way of saying that is to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, that's good.
Let's define a couple of our terms. So we're going to talk about an annuity. So as you know, an annuity, and then you just define it.
Very good.
Another thing we're going to talk about is whole life insurance. And so what's the difference between whole life and term? Here's simple definition. So anything that you do like that just increases clarity. And as you said, Ed, I forget exactly the words you said, but a confused mind doesn't accept anything that you're offering. So they say no if you're making an offer.
Interestingly, I mean, from a psychological standpoint, it goes all the way back to like 3rd grade, because in 3rd grade, someone raised their hand and asked a question that was a stupid question, and the class laughed, and immediately you said to yourself, I'm never going to ask a question for the rest of my life, and I'm never going to show anyone that I don't know the answer. And it like shuts you down really quickly. And so what happens is, if a person is confused, this is fundamentally one of the most powerful marketing principles to know as you're watching the show. If someone is confused, they won't tell you, they won't ask their question, they just won't take any action. And so the reason why a lot of times people don't end up going through a sales presentation and taking action at the end isn't because they weren't interested in the benefits. It's just they were confused along the way, and it completely shut them down. So I like that. By the way, Gina said, here's my reframe. I'm a pilot, which means I'm incapable of having a complete conversation without quoting extensively from Top Gun and Airplane. That was really good.
That's something you're supposed to use then, right, Ed?
I like that. Gina's a pilot too. I thought that was
That's very good.
yeah, I mean, I Airplane, man. I haven't quoted from Airplane for a while. Thank you, Jenny, for your awesome comments. Very good stuff. All right, Joel. I don't even know where we're at on our checklist here, but
well, let's see another one. When telling a story, frame it with time, date, and people.
Okay.
Now, this is a very important tool. So many times we hear this expression, Ed, and as a professional speaker, you know this. So this is a true story. The minute you say that, this is a true story, what about all the other stories we just heard? I guess they're not true. Finally, we're getting a true story.
That's
so
right.
one tool that you should put in your speaking is never say that something is true. Everything should be true that you talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you do that, well, here's another one that I know you have heard. Let me be honest with you for a minute.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Let me be honest with you.
Yeah,
I've been lying for the last 42 minutes, but now we're going to get to the truth.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's right. None of that's good. So here's a way to establish credibility and believability when you tell a story. And stories, Ed, you're such a great storyteller. You use your military experience. You relate that to them. But one of the things Ed always does that you need to do is you open with the point of a story. You don't leave it as a mystery, because so many times people start into a story and the audience is thinking, what does that have to do with me? I don't know anything about flying an airplane. So if Ed is talking about, being under attack when he's flying a plane, have you ever been attacked? Sometimes negative things are happening. That's very similar to what happened to me when I was flying jets, F-18s, over such and such, March 16th, 2006. I don't know the date. Yeah. But here's the key. Use a date, time, place, people.
That's very good.
That establishes credibility. So let me share a story with you that I think will be helpful to prove belief number one. I asked you in the start of this discussion that speaking is a learned skill.
Yeah.
My first talk, and I mentioned earlier, I gave a presentation until I was 28 years old. So it was September 4th, 1969. I was giving a talk, my first talk, in front of a sales group of 17 people. And after the talk was over, everybody left. I'm packing up my material, and a guy walks back in and he says, "Would you like some feedback?" Now, Ed, you mentioned how you got feedback on something about those automated responses.
Yeah.
And I said, well, yeah. He said, "This was the worst meeting I've ever been to, and you're the worst speaker I have ever heard in my whole life." Now, Ed, you're an ex-Marine. I have no military experience. I started crying like a baby. And he said, "Stop crying. You're a grown man. You're 28 years old. Don't cry. Fix it." I said, well, how do I do that? He said, "I knew it wasn't any good, but he said, I'm going to fix you. You're going to come to Toastmasters with me on Tuesday morning at Brad's Coffee Shop in Tempe, Arizona, and we're going to fix you." And that was the day my life changed.
Wow.
Because on September 9th, 1969, I walked into the Tempe, Arizona Toastmasters, and I saw what a Toastmasters meeting was, and I joined. And I know as you're listening to this, you have probably heard the word Toastmasters before. It's not a toaster to make your breakfast toast in the morning. It's a worldwide organization. We have over 200 clubs in Arizona alone.
Wow.
So wherever you are, there's a Toastmasters club. And I went to that meeting and I joined, and I realized that there was a way to learn to speak. 4 years later, I entered a speech contest, ended up at the world's finals in front of 2,000 people at the Disneyland Hotel. Wow. And placed in the top 3 in the world. And with that one decision to learn to speak, my life changed forever. Because after 3 days of being home, I get a call from a man named Paul Cronin. And Paul says, "We'd like to have you come and speak at our Independent Garage Owners Association meeting. Would you be available and would you come?" So I checked my day. I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'd come." He said, "Well, we got to talk money." I said, "Well, okay. What do you mean?" He said, "Well, how does $25 sound?" Now, this was in 1969. And I said, well, that sounds fine. Who do I send the check to? He says, no. You get 25. I said, I get $25? He said, yeah, and you get a chicken dinner. And that was my first paid speech. And I asked him, why did you call me? He said, because I read in the paper that you won a speech contest, so you must be an expert. And that's why, as a member of EdTalks audience, you need to be speaking.
I like
because
that.
Once you speak, people elevate the status. You become an expert on what you're speaking about. And that began my speaking career. And today I've upped it to $50. No, it's gone up a lot since then. But what's the point of that story? That speaking is a learned skill. I am the least likely person to be in the Hall of Fame to have done this career for 46 years based on where I started.
It's such
and no matter where you are, you can get better.
It's such a good example too, because if you say speaking is a learned skill, some people will say, okay, I believe you. And a lot of people will go, yeah, but you don't understand how bad of a speaker I am. And so when you tell your story, it was this day in 1969, then it brings them into the story with you, and they go, hey, well, I'm not that bad. And all of a sudden they can do it. I think that's really, really great. By the way, if you just joined us, my name's Ed Rush. I'm here with Joel Weldon. We're talking about communicating. And I'll tell you what, we've hit 4 of the top 5 points that you've got, Joel. By the way, in about 2 to 3 minutes, we're going to take a few of your questions. If you have any, we'll be wrapping up the show in just a few minutes. So if you have any questions or comments, put those in the chat right now. Joel, I think you've got one other thing on the list here, which is...
Yes, I think we're going to hold that to the end.
Okay.
So let me tell them what you've written on here. So Ed's got down here, why tying your closing back to your opening can add additional impact to your message. So we open with the elephants don't bite, the power of doing little things. But since we're not ready to end it right this minute, I'm going to hold that. It's very short. So Ed, when you're ready for me to get out of here and end our congenial debate, you tell me, and I'm going to give you an example. But let me give you the point of that.
Yeah.
Many times you have a powerful story. So I was just coaching one of our clients. She's the name is Susie from Sweden, and she lives over in Sweden. And her story opens with, imagine you're 8 years old, you come home from school, and your stepmother tells you your father has sold you to somebody in the Ukraine on a tomato farm, and here's the ticket, you're leaving tomorrow.
Wow.
That's exactly what happened to me 35 years ago.
Wow.
I'll tell you more about that later, because what I want to talk to you about is the wounds that we sometimes carry for our whole life. And her message is to write a letter to yourself to get rid of the wounds from the past. That's now, do you think if you open with something like that, you'd want to stay till the end to hear the rest of the story? So that's one of the two. If you have a powerful story, open with it, but don't finish it. So maybe, there I was surrounded by, these enemy fighters. The missile is coming right at me. And I knew, based on my training, there was only one thing I could do. And that one thing is the same thing you can do.
That's great.
Grow your business.
Joel, I had
that is when we finish.
I had a story. So I used to use this technique with one of my stories. And I'll tell you, it works better the way you just described it, where you get to the climax of the story, and then you transition and you tell them the end at the end. So I have this story that I tell about my first carrier landing. You've heard me tell the story. And what I used to do is I would get to the part where I was about to die in the airplane, and then I would teach them something about implementation. Then I would bring them into the rest of my talk, and then at the end of the talk, I would come back and go, now, we didn't finish that story about me landing on the carrier. And I'll tell you, one time I would just maybe I didn't get enough sleep or something. One time, Joel, I ended my talk without finishing the story. And I got to the back, and the first person who got to the back, he had jumped out of his seat and chased me down the center aisle. And he walked up to me and he said, "Did you die?" That was the question. He goes, "Did you die? What happened?" And then a whole bunch of people came around me, And they said, what happened with the thing? And I go, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell the story. So I stood up on the chair and I said, I didn't die. I didn't die. I was okay. And I thought, man, if you're going to open one of those stories, you better just make sure you have it in your notes someplace to close one of those stories. But the point that I learned there is it is so powerful when you open, it's opening up a loop is what it's called from a persuasion standpoint. When you open that loop, it's so powerful that it really does bring people through the rest of your talk. I love that. I love that technique. The open loop.
Open with the close. So we're not ready for the close yet.
We're almost there. About 2 minutes. We're
right.
about there. I want to just say there's some really great comments, which are really good. Thank you, Robert. Beautiful story. It is a really great story. And you know, the story that you told about the kid sitting on his bed, that's a great example too of how you can be humorous in a talk without even telling jokes necessarily. I mean, that's just a really funny story. I thought it was hysterical, and you were actually, interestingly enough, you were reading it. So I just always tell people there's a lot of different ways to be humorous in a talk if you want to. I like that. Anita, very good. By the way, I want to give you a resource as just before we wrap up. This is a website. If you just go to edrush.com/Joel, that's a really great way to get connected with Joel. A good number of my students, as you know, Joel, have gone over to take your Ultimate Speaking System course. And we gave everyone a really good deal back when we did that. I'm pretty sure that might still be available. But if you're interested in going deeper with Joel, the last I checked inside of Ultimate Speaking System, Joel had hundreds of training nuggets like the ones that you've just learned. So if what you just got from Joel kind of piqued your interest a little bit, if you really want to go a little deeper, like Anita, if you want to learn storytelling, if you want to learn how to use humor a little bit better, if you want to know how to connect to your audience, Joel's only been doing it for 150 years. So he's got a lot of experience. And see, those jokes are safe after you make fun of yourself. Those jokes are really safe, but the website's below. So Joel, why don't you take us home? I don't see any other questions here in chat. Why don't you take us home?
Well, since you brought up the Ultimate Speaking System, you know, we're going to keep that same offer that we made to your special members first time. So if you just go to our website, ultimatespeaker.com, and then the promo code, you can get everything at half amount. You get 50% off
price, right,
of the Ultimate Speaking System, and it's a one-time investment. It's only $14.97. It's normally $3,000. You get it for half. It's one time, and everything I create for the future you get. You never pay another penny.
Right.
So it's described all over there. If you want an introduction, if you want to tell better stories, if you want openings, and then there's content like that letter that I read, that's available to you as a member to use all of these things that I've used
in your own talk
over the last 40 years.
That's great.
That's included in your investment too. And it's guaranteed.
You can use that story. You could just download it from your membership site. Use that story in your own talks.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes. And I've got others with slide decks that you can use that have even better stories than that.
Oh, that's cool.
Okay. So are you ready for me to close?
Yeah, let's take us home, buddy.
Okay. So remember, the point that we're making is tie your opening to your close. So the opening of our message, if you joined us late, was elephants don't bite. It's the little things, the gnats, the mosquitoes, and the bees, or the no-see-ums that get us. And then I gave an example that if you saved $1 a day, when your little child is born, 2-year-old, Ed, in your case, that before they're 70, they would have $1 million if you just saved $1 a day at 8% compounded interest. But since you're part of listening to Ed and you're a bigger thinker, if you made it $2, now $2 compared to $1 is not going to break you. But if you put $2 away from the day your child is born or starting today, you'd have $1 million before that child is 45.
Yeah. Wow.
That's the power of little things.
Wow.
So let me give you 22 little words that sum up 46 years of speaking. And on page 148 of the toolbox in our system, this is it, where it says, if you were to put everything in one sentence, here's what it is. And this is for you. Speak to your audience about what they need in an organized way they can follow, and get yourself out of the way.
Oh, that's great.
And make it a great day. And Ed, it's always a joy being with you and your team.
Thank you, Joel. You, sir, are the man. It's awesome to have you back. There was a comment earlier on in chat that said something like, "You need to just have Joel back next week." And so next week, the shows are already set up for next week, David Jets. But Joel, whenever I want to have a guest back, I always ask you when everyone's here. That way, you can't say no. So
the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. All right.
Well, let me just tell you why. This guy is not only so professional in what he does, but he's so professional in organizing these talks. Everything is set up ahead of time. It's checked out. This is what being an ex-pilot does for you. He's got checklists and things are organized. And that's what you need to think of, having a checklist so nothing falls through the cracks, because your clients are relying on you. And if you do that, you're going to have raving fan customers and clients.
Love it, man.
Like you are for Ed. So thank you for your professionalism, Ed, and the energy and joy that you bring to these interviews.
Awesome, Joel. Thank you. By the way, in chat, please give Joel a big 5 or a clap or your appreciation. I mean, look, today's show was packed full of information. So I do recommend going back and catching some key parts. Just so you know, when these shows are over, within about maybe 20 minutes or so, we have full show notes that exist underneath this video. So if you're interested in finding a certain part of the show, there's actually links right to certain parts of the show. So if you ever go back to the recordings, my team does a great job of putting notes underneath in the description where you can click that. And today's the kind of show that you want to do that. Lots of really great comments in chat. Thank you so much. 5s and high fives. And everybody, thank you very much for every one of your awesome comments. We're going to wrap up today's show. Joel, thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon. Ed Talks Live is out.